Hey everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of our alphabetical taboo busting journey. Today we're going to talk about J for judgment. This is something we've touched upon in different ways, and I think is actually quite central to the whole idea of a taboo, because a taboo in its essence is something that's not really talked about often for fear of being judged. So, Sylvia, welcome to a judgment-free, safe zone for us to discuss this taboo.
Hello, John Thor. And I know this is the traveling edition of our series. I know you're somewhere else other than your usual location today. So hello and greetings to you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm actually in lovely Sweden right now, and will be for the next few episodes. But yeah, so in terms of judgment, it's a really interesting topic, and it's one that we've touched upon in different ways, which is really fun to sort of look back on. But at the same time, so I also want to keep looking forward and focus on a few different elements, including what it means to us in personal lives and professional, because if we look at the sort of subtitle that we've sometimes referenced to, which workplace and beyond, we tend to take these topics on from different perspectives that are still quite interlinked.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, last week when we talked about imitation, we were talking about how we often put ourselves into roles or act in a certain way to avoid being judged. So two of the main things that I'm really curious about talking about is really what drives us to judge and what makes us care so much about being judged.
That's a great starting point, and I'm all fired up about this, as you know, because I received some pretty negative judgment myself about my creativity and my creations this week over two separate, unrelated areas. And so, I was reflecting this morning about like, why am I so fired up? Why am I so worked up and feel so enraged about people judging me? And so I love to dive into with you, yet on the surface, as I just peeled it one layer back about this enraged sensation, it's actually hurt. So like underneath the anger is hurt in that I'm like, ouch. Like someone, for instance, I'll just come out and say it. After my broadcast on Monday on LinkedIn about having an abundance mindset and what is done for my work and my personal life, someone wrote me and said basically that I was basic in my insights. And it did send me down a negative spiral for probably half an hour. Like I started saying things like, man, why did I bother? Who am I to talk about this stuff? And maybe this guy's right. Like maybe I am basic. And I think was very much about my identity in a way of like I thought, hey, like I'm just trying to be generous, I'm trying to help other people with my insights, and then someone comes and steps all over that, right? So it was hurtful, I think, but like the immediate primary emotion was anger, and then hurt, and then disappointment, and then doubt. And so and then I'll reference the second scenario in a little bit. Yet yeah, I am curious to get your take as a friend and my thinking partner on why this has stung so much to the point where all of Tuesday morning I was like, I don't really want to show my face today.
Well, I think, it's normal for that to sting. And I think, anytime I hear someone say that they don't care about what anyone else thinks, or you shouldn't, care what anyone else says, they're either lying or they're a sociopath.
Agreed.
Because at the end of the day, not only is it just natural to take some things personally, like I'm not saying that you should act out and lash out on it and send back expletive riddled emails to that person or anything. Feel free to if it helps, but I don't think it will.
I did
But
not, just for the record, I did not.
yeah, let the record state.
Yes.
But from my perspective, like it's normal to take that personally, and then we deal with it, we work through it, and then we move on.
Yeah.
But in reality, we need to step back and think, okay, that judgment can affect us both personally and emotionally, but also sometimes it is a professional impact that we can feel. Not all press is good press, after all. Sometimes notoriety can be good, but it's not always.
Hmm.
And I think to, I guess, dive into this specific judgment, this idea of what you were sharing being basic, I couldn't help but laugh when you told me this, because if you look at anyone who's excelled at something, I mean, truly excelled, been at the top of their game on a universal level, pretty much anyone, if they get asked, what was the secret? It's pretty much always focus on the basics, get extremely good at the fundamentals. And whether that's Gary Vee talking about running a business, whether that's a world-class athlete, like Michael Jordan talking about the way that he played basketball. If you speak to a world-class musician, and those things that might be basic to you, to me, to anyone, like very often there's people out there that haven't looked at that as basic. And almost every time where I've made a video where I've thought, am I sharing something that's a bit too basic? Am I spoon feeding the world here? Almost every single time someone jumps in the comments or messages me and goes, I'd never thought of it that way.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, we often forget to cover those basics because we think they're too basic. But in reality, like when I taught people how to play intricate, complicated stuff on like guitar or bass, people would struggle to play something intricate fast, but in reality, their problem was they weren't doing it well slowly.
Right. Yeah, we talked about the analogy of playing arpeggios
Yeah,
in music, right? Again, I remember my own violin teacher going, if you don't master arpeggios, how are you going to get to concert level anything?
yeah,
Like any concertos, the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, Beethoven violin, any masterful piece that you want to gain mastery on is built on the fundamentals. If you don't know how to do scales, you can't play arpeggios at a normal pace, you cannot possibly master these masterful pieces. So, and I do want to tie into this idea of, I love your encouragement of focusing on the fundamentals and not pay heed to this person who called me basic. You're right, the fundamentals are very important, and a lot of times people bypass them thinking that they can reach the top without that strong foundation. They probably can, yet it may not last. It's probably not sustainable or repeatable. Yet I'll just add to that, even as you were encouraging me to really celebrate the fact that we're helping people build the fundamentals, I couldn't help but recognize that I ignored all the positive comments. So it's like the haircut effect, right? One person telling you, man, your hair sucks. That's literally the only thing that you're going to remember, versus the 15 other people that might have said, wow, you're rocking your new hairdo. And I do want to point that out to spark the conversation with you first and foremost, but also bring an awareness that, to myself more than anything, that yeah, there's something in our brains that get fixated or tune into that negative channel much more loudly and even frequently than perhaps the positive. So, even as I look back on Tuesday morning, I probably over indexed on looking at that person's comment versus the many, many, many other comments that were super encouraging, super positive, people who were genuinely curious, for whom the ideas weren't basic. They were literally trying to learn. And so, yeah, I just want to call that out and kind of get your take on why is it that we lean into the negative, and whether you think there's some way that we can learn or unlearn that behavior.
well, I think the simple way of looking at it is because it plays into our insecurities. you
Mm,
know there's a reason why saying it plays into our securities it doesn't sound as natural. It's not really a phrase we use,
yeah.
because someone can tell you a million times that, to use the haircut example, that it looks great. But if one person comes in and says it doesn't, if you were already feeling insecure,
Mm.
instead of it being everyone else said so, it's really easy to go, everyone else must have been lying. They're just telling me that because they think I want to hear it. And suddenly it's almost like everyone's been poking you, and then someone pokes you in that sore spot, and you just fall apart.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of, a way to get over it or, move away from that, I think it's often just to question and understand, why is that the thing that hurts? And, it's so I guess continue that musical analogy. It's kind of like taking feedback from someone. If someone who doesn't play music told you that you were never going to get to concert level, it it could hurt. But would it really mean anything? Does that person's opinion truly weigh something when you take it critically? Versus your violin teacher saying that unless you do this, you'll never reach concert level. Even in that structure, it can be easy to just hear never reach concert level, but they've
Yes.
offered you a way out.
Yes. Yes.
Judgment without that constructive element, without saying how it could be better,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's just basically taking a shit on what you're doing.
It's
It's
total hostility at best.
Yeah,
You're right. Like it's a jab without really any intent to fight, like, or true
yeah,
intent to do anything, action oriented. Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Yeah.
And a lot of people that do that, that make it a habit to do those jabs,
Mm-hmm.
are people that if you were to push back, they often resort to things like, "Man, I'm just saying my opinion. You don't need to take it personally.
Oh my
Back
gosh.
off.
Yes.
Just chill. Don't raise your voice. Don't get upset with me."
Mm-hmm.
And but funnily enough, usually those are the people that would turn around and just lose their mind if you criticize something of theirs. I'm sure anyone listening either knows that person or subtly knows that they're that person. Um,
Well, interesting you say that. I encountered exactly that a few months ago, unfortunately with a potential client, and I, in the end had to politely decline to work with this team and in particular this person. And it was exactly that, right? So this person came out of the gate one day after a couple rounds of discussions, and he basically was like, you're terrible at X, like whatever that thing was. And I go, okay, good to know. So what would you advise would be not terrible? So now that you pointed out I'm terrible at this, so show me what good is, so I can decide whether it is within my ability to get there or not, or whether I have the desire to get there or not. Because if you're pointing this out, and first of all, like this thing is peripheral anyway to whatever we're doing, but if you found it so critical that you had to blurt that out in front of my face and everybody else, then let's go there. Clearly you care about this. Then this person went straight to the gaslighting. It was like, well, I'm just giving feedback. I'm like, I understand that. So then give me feedback. I just asked for it. So I'm opening the door for you to tell me what the steps are to get better in this thing that you said I'm terrible at.
yeah,
Nothing. He had nothing. And then he had the audacity to go, well, I just don't think that you're very friendly to feedback. I go, oh no, I am. Let these people in this room bear witness that I have now asked 3 separate times for you to give me constructive feedback so that I can no longer be terrible at this thing that you said I'm terrible at. And I have heard not a single constructive piece of actionable advice.
yeah.
Let these people bear witness.
How do you expect someone to get better if the only thing you can say is that it's not good?
Wait. And that was when it dawned on me that this person was trying to shit on me. Like literally, that's it. And I was like, and then I called it out the next day in a private conversation. I go, I do not do that. Like that is not how I define what leadership looks like. That's not aligning to my ethos in how I conduct business. Like if you want to take a dump on people, like I want no part of that. In fact, like I want to turn that around, but I don't think you're open to that. And I think he was starting to see that I was not going to take it lying down. Yet he kept saying, well, I just really want you to be better. I go, I want to be better too. we agreed on that. So now, again, I'm going to ask you one more time, what is it going to take for me to not be terrible? Give me anything. I have not heard a single thing that's actionable that is not about my being. So you're attacking my being. So like either you're just doing that to take jabs for the sake of jabbing, or if you don't know, just say you don't know. I'm going to give you a door out. Like if you don't know, just say so. And it was just one of those like, I then had to term it. I go, what you're doing is actually hostile.
Yeah.
Like that's it. There's no other way to describe this. And I just don't see where this is going, or this is not going to go in a way that's productive for either side, honestly.
And it's just and I've used this example before from a sales perspective, where like if you call someone up and ask, let's say you sell website design, and you call someone up and you go, how happy are you about your website? If they say not happy, you can't just go, right, I'll sell you some new design. They could be unhappy about it for a number of reasons. You can't just assume that whatever you're selling is the solution without them knowing what you're selling. You don't know what they're buying.
Right.
Similarly, he could say you're terrible at something, but what's he measuring that against? Is it that that he doesn't like the way you talk about it? Is it that how you handle clients? Is it that it doesn't fit with his methodology of whatever you're doing? It's just incredibly vague and unhelpful. And
Right.
I think, that's a really good point to sort of start segueing toward, I guess, towards the second of the two topics that we talked about in the beginning, which is, we're talking about why it touches us so deeply and how it hurts.
Yeah.
And really, I think it also comes down to both how it's being said and how it sort of touches upon our insecurities. But it also feeds into, who's saying it and why. And, I know I've shared this story with you where I saw someone post on LinkedIn specifically saying, how can I block someone on LinkedIn? I keep seeing their content. I hate seeing this person's face. It annoys me. They've resorted to the terrible idea of doing daily videos every day. And I love the fact that they said daily videos every day, as if there's a different way of doing daily videos. And just goes on this rant about how every time they see this person's face in their LinkedIn feed, it ruins their day. And a few people were telling him how he could block this person. And one person comes in and goes, come on, you gotta name and shame. Gotta tell me who this person is. And this guy comes out and tags me. And the guy who asked him the name, and I found this kind of hilarious, he goes and starts tagging the person who made that post in every single one of my videos and goes, thought you had to see this. Bro, you've got to see this one. And just having loads of fun with him. And this guy was just commenting like, dude, stop. Dude, I don't want to see it. And on surface level, it probably looks a little bit like bullying, but what made me find it really funny was, first of all, to be honest, if I take a step back and think, what do I lose from this one person not liking my content? Probably just that him and probably some of his friends won't check out my content, which in the grand scheme of things is no big loss. But the second reason I found this really funny was I know why it bothers this person to see my face on social media. And it's because in a past job, I fired this person for sexual harassment in the workplace. And I realize for listeners that probably took a weird turn for the very serious after kind of humorous story, but it just shows that because I was aware of the fact that me and this person's morals obviously don't line up, and knowing that the reason that this judgment was coming around was because of a decision I made that I still believe was in every single way the right decision. I realized that the judgment isn't about anything that's going to spark an insecurity in me. The decision to judge didn't come from anything about my personality. It came from this person having a bad feeling connected to me. And look, I did that person a favor when I saw people starting to tag him in my videos. I blocked that person so they don't see my content, because look, this person obviously has issues, needs to deal with them, and people stoking that fire probably won't help.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
funny for the first couple tags, but then I was like, look, this person just needs to deal with their own stuff. But it's I think it's a good example of where someone's judgment could have easily been taken on board as a personal thing, but with the whole contextual situation, it takes on a different form.
I love your vulnerability and transparency around it. So thank you for sharing. I know it's not always easy to talk about somebody being that bothered by seeing your face. So thank you for courageously stepping up to share that. Let me ask a question then. So in this case, and not to diminish the I think appalling nature of this person's intent, yet in this case there was a clear reason why this person's judgment should not be taken seriously. Yet how can we help people who are right now struggling with judgment from those who are close to them, who are supposed to be nurturing or supportive, or even someone they might look up to, right? Let's say like someone got this really tough comment that just felt like a punch in the gut from somebody they look up to. What's something you would advise somebody in that position to either think through or do differently?
When you started saying that, I felt a whole Pandora's box of thoughts opening up in my mind, and I was like about to launch into about 5 different rants at the same time, but I'll try to compartmentalize for a second. And I think it ties into a lot of different things. One of them, and I guess the simplest to say, most difficult to do, would be question whether that person is worth looking up to.
Mm.
And that's, I know, like I said, it's a difficult thing to do, especially if it's someone close to you, a family member or a boss, even a mentor.
Hmm.
But I think we often seek unattainable things, not because they're the best for us, but because they're unattainable. And I think if we take a really weird turn into romantic comedies, um, we see stories all the time of triumphing over the great injustice of someone not liking us. There are all these stories about like,
Yeah.
I'm going to date this person. Then we watch about 70 minutes of that person saying no until there's some grand gesture that turns it into a yes. And that's abusive as hell, and like really a toxic idea to chase after. Because in any format or way, if someone is consistently pushing you away, whether it is actively or in your example, just putting you down and
Mm.
giving you really unfair criticism or unhelpful criticism, chasing after them is probably not going to lead you into a dream scenario in life. You know, I'd rather have friends that want me around than ones I have to chase and change myself to be with. Same thing with romantic relationships, same thing with jobs.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's easy to fall into that place where you change yourself based on other people's judgment. And there's a lot of self-awareness needed in order to realize where the line can be drawn between a fair judgment and an unfair one. Because look, we've all got flaws we need to work on. But if the judgment is seemingly made largely to manipulate you into changing for someone else's standards, that person probably shouldn't be the mentor or loved one that you look up to. And this is difficult. Like I said, I know we've both talked about family members that we've had to deal with this sort of thing from, and it's incredibly difficult, but it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who it is if it's harming your sense of self-worth, your sense of happiness. You've got to take steps for your own well-being to get yourself into a position where the judgment you're receiving on a day-to-day basis is actually helping you get better rather than tearing you down. So I guess that's one of the boxes I wanted to open up about that, because I feel like that's something we don't talk about enough.
Hmm.
About people talk about that you're the amalgamation of everyone that you surround yourself with and spend the most time with. And I think this is a really important part of it. It's not just how they lead their lives and how they treat you, it's how they speak to you and about you. Because how others around you speak about you and to you really impacts the way we speak about and to ourselves.
I love that framing so much, because one of the things that I've had to learn in a very painful way is that, in our growth and ascent to that next version of ourselves, we do outgrow people. And just because we share the same DNA with them, or somehow, right, there is that history, it does not necessitate that they are the right partners for us for the whole journey of our growth, and that forward um, motion. And there are times when, yeah, we have to come to that tough realization that these people might still intend well for us, right? They have good intentions, they have every desire for us to be successful, yet the outgrowing has happened in that they might have reached their own zenith already, which is maybe miles from where we want to be. And yeah, like you said, to really calibrate and ask ourselves truthfully, in the sense of, does this actually help me, right? Is this in alignment with my values or my vision or whatever I want to do or to get to? I think it's easy to forget to do that kind of internal calibration or introspection, because yeah, it is easy to assume that people around you, especially family, right, people who are blood, that they would want the best for you, yet it's either sometimes not always the best, because it just isn't available, or it really is no longer the best, right? That the bar for best has moved because you've grown. So yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about looking at that, and yeah, taking the time to examine.
And I think, examining that ties really well into, I guess, the final point that would be really good to talk about, which is really this idea of what drives us to judge. And
Mm,
this is one of those things that's always frustrated me, because I find it the same with the way that schools handled bullying back in the day, and probably still do. I don't know. I haven't really been too involved in that. Um, which is this idea that if someone judges you, they're just jealous, or
mm,
they haven't done this and that. And while that's probably true in some instances, it's way too simple of an explanation to make up for anything. And even if it was entirely 100% true, it doesn't really make anything better. Like if someone's giving you crap every day and someone says, "Oh, they're just jealous," it doesn't suddenly make everything okay. It's like the whole like, "Oh, if he's bullying you, he's having a tough time. Probably he probably feels worse than you." Like doesn't really fix anything. So I
right.
think taking a step back and actually talking about what you said, you would love to believe that that person wants what's best for you. I think the problem with that isn't that they don't want what's best for you, but that they think they know what's best for you.
Mm, yeah,
Because what's best hasn't necessarily just moved. It might have changed completely.
that's true. Yeah.
Because, if we take for an example, anyone who's been in a family that has vastly different ideas of the way you should lead your life. If we look at people who have to come out as, part of the LGBTQ community, some sort of identity that doesn't gel with, let's say, very old-fashioned parents. Um, in no way am I excusing the actions of those parents, but in their minds, they might think, oh, what's best for my kid is to not be that way because either of societal or religious reasons that they have. But that doesn't tie into either A, the way that person needs to live their life to be happy, or B,
Mm.
anything that I would consider good or rational in this world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we flip the perspective to the people doing the judging, to them it's completely rational. But that's where I think a healthy combination of challenging and educating comes in. You know, your example from earlier is perfect, where you said, okay, if I'm terrible at this, how do I get better? If the person cannot bring themselves to give you away, they're not giving you any constructive criticism. They're just pulling you down. In the same way, if someone is judging the way that you live your life, if your family is saying you're doing it wrong, if you can sort of challenge them on it, push back a little bit, and also bring that education around where it's, you know, look, this is the way that I want to live my life. I'm trying to get here. That might not be your ideal version of life, but it is mine. And I'm not saying that will work every time.
Right.
Honestly, it might even work in a minuscule amount of the time. But for me, it's about having at least, if you've tried that and it just doesn't work, then maybe that person, as hard as it is, as difficult and painful as it can be, maybe that person isn't worth your time.
I I love how you just help spark an insight in me in that it's about limitations in the other person. So when you ask the question of, why do people judge, or how does it come about, or even this whole idea that it's really not as basic as just someone's jealous.
Hmm.
I think you're right. It is a good starting point, though, because it does point in the direction of the person doing the judging, that the problem might be within the person giving that criticism versus the person receiving the criticism. Yet, when I think about those different parts, one theme comes up consistently is that person's limitation. So I'm going to use my own mother as an example. All my life, it was her judging my choices. It was, you're either too curious, too smart for your own good, too adventurous. Why can't you just stay home, find a husband, right? Get married, have a house, and that's that, right? And it is judgment in that reflects her own limitations of what she believes a woman can and should be. So, right, me having a career, me living abroad several times over in multiple locations, me doing all kinds of things that are about my creativity and the expression of the creativity. Like, to her, it's literally beyond her, because her frame of reference for what is available to someone of my gender and race and heritage is such that, yeah, like, find someone to take care of you, like, you don't ever have to worry again, kick your feet up and all will be well. And so the judgment, of her calling me, I'm too anything, right? Too ambitious, too wild, whatever the F you want to call it. It comes from her own place of fear. It's her fearing that I will not be okay, because to her, being okay requires a husband who can financially provide for you and, right, have a house and a yard. And so, yeah, can we say, that her intentions were not noble? No. I think she did have good intentions, and that of course she would want her offspring to be well. Yet her idea of being well is vastly different than mine. And I do think it goes back to just her limitations in her perspective, in her ability to see other people's perspectives or desires or acknowledge them even, right? So it's limitation in so many ways, yet I think that is the source, unfortunately, of that judgment.
Yeah, and I think, that judgment, what often really bothers me about the way that it's put forth is often it is a matter of opinion, but it's someone stating their opinion as if it's more important or more valid than yours.
Yeah, and that was
And
really difficult because, I mean, I lived under her roof, right? So
yeah,
talk about, I mean, we talked about this earlier, in that someone's judgment in the workplace can literally derail you, or make you, right? It can make or break you. And in a way, I look back, and my brother and I talk about this all the time. We're like, how did we how did we come out of this okay, right? Because we could have literally just been locked up,
Yeah.
like Bubble Boy, like, right, wrapped in a bubble, never doing anything that would be deemed too adventurous, too risky. And
Yeah.
luckily we did have another parents who had our shared values of expansion of our minds, of our knowledge, the key word that we're going to come back to, and right, learning and gathering experiences. So in a way, we lucked out that we had this duality in our household, that there was somebody who believed in those things that we wanted to grow into, yet unfortunately we had that opposing force as well. Yeah, I mean, we literally, if it had not been that positive influence from the other parents, I might have just been homeschooled and never learned about social interactions. I would have certainly never traveled. I probably wouldn't have gotten out of my zip code, or who knows, right? So yeah, but it literally was, her limitation could have become my limitations. And to use this quote that I've now debunked, but it's this idea of, like, you put someone in, put a shark in a tank, it won't grow more than a certain number of feet, or meters in your case. But it's probably biologically not quite true. But I know the idea that when someone's limitation is enforced on you, you are limited. You are, just by virtue of their own fears, kept back and held back.
And this is why, actually, to, yes, return to a key word and start talking about next week's episode, it's why judgment and fear have often been used in collaboration with a lack of knowledge, and often an intentional starvation of knowledge of people, where, the less you know about how other people live, or of the outside world, in the case of very closed off communities,
Mm-hmm.
the less you'll question, the less you'll wonder about the judgment. And
Mm-hmm.
in those scenarios, that judgment becomes your biggest fear. You get judged by those around you, those above you, and you get sucked up into this worrying cycle of living based off of others' judgments rather than your own beliefs. And knowledge, as many who are listening right now might actually have gathered, will be the letter of next week's episode. So K for knowledge. What we want to talk about, largely not just what I've just touched upon, that's more of a side note of personal interest, I guess, but also down to why we're so afraid of saying I don't know.
Mm.
Why do we think of knowing everything by heart as being the crux of intelligence? Why do we not look at the pursuit of information and knowing how to grow and adapt as the true form of intelligence? Well, we'll discuss that and a lot more next week. So in the meantime, don't judge each other too harshly. And if someone judges you harshly, just challenge them and educate. Let's see how that works out.
Great advice. See you next week, my friend.
See ya.